This video will teach you about how to make pivot tables from tables, what the different parts of a pivot table are, how we can answer questions using pivot tables, and lastly, how we can use pivot tables to make charts. So, let's get right into the video. What are pivot tables? A pivot table is basically a feature in Excel that allows you to summarize data sources and convert them into what is known as pivot tables. Unlike tables you usually see, pivot tables are commonly used for summarizing data, especially large datasets. It is really helpful in analyzing data. Also, if you want to follow along the video, you can check out the practice file down below the description. How to make pivot tables. Okay, so first, we obviously need some source of data. There we go. If you're wondering where this random data came from, it is from this website called mocaro.com or however you pronounce it. So if you notice that there are some wacky numbers here and there, please keep in mind that this is what you call, in a sense, testing data. So first, this is just a range of data. And while we can use it to create a pivot table, it's actually better that we convert this raw data into a table, and no, not the kind of table that you format everything on your own. I'm talking about list object types of tables. List object tables are basically tables but more advanced. So to convert this data into a table, we simply need to select any cell inside this range of data. Go to the Insert tab, and then click Table. Now as you can see, Excel has automatically selected for us the whole range of data. Let's check my table has headers. Click on OK, and there we go. Now, right after we've converted it into a table, it's now time to turn it into a pivot table. We do this by selecting any cell inside the table, go to Insert tab, and click on Pivot Table. Now as you can see, a far bigger pop-up will appear, but it's rather simple. Now, we don't need to change or click any of this, so just click OK. Now that we have created the table, time to move to the next part. Oh, also, let's call this sheet the raw data sheet. What are the parts of a pivot table? Before we start, let's call this sheet pivot table. So now, once you've created a pivot table, you're greeted by this sidebar called Pivot Table Fields. It's gonna look confusing at first, but trust me, it's really simple. So this part right here, every item here is called a field. These fields are based off from the data you use to create the pivot table. And this lower part right here, these are called areas. It's gonna be confusing just explaining everything, so I'll just show you how it works. And so that we don't get lost, let's use pivot tables to answer some questions from this range of data. I've made right here 3 simple questions we want to answer using only pivot tables. Now, if you're familiar with functions, then you might be asking yourself, well, can't we just use formulas and functions to answer the questions? For simple questions and problems, the answer is yes. But for far more complicated questions, especially if we only need to summarize data, it's far more efficient to use pivot tables than to make formulas that are way too complicated and long. But if you're somehow not familiar with functions and formulas at all, then you can check out this video of mine later to learn more about functions. How to answer questions from pivot tables. So the first question is relatively simple. What is the amount of products in the clothing category that are available? So to answer this using our pivot table, we'll simply go to our pivot table sheet and then select our pivot table to open up the pivot table fields sidebar. Now let's analyze what possible fields we'll need to answer the question. It seems that we'll need the product name field, the category field, and the availability field. So since we're talking about amount of products, we'll put the product name field into the values area. Now, we want to see how many products there are under the clothing category. And so that means we'll put the category field either into the rows or columns area. We'll put it into the rows area. Now after that, we want to see how many products under clothing category are available. So we can either put the availability field into the rows or column area. Where you put it totally depends on how you want your pivot table to look like. For me, I'll put the availability field into the columns area. As you can see, there are 110 available products under the clothing category. And that's the answer to our first question. Our second question to answer is, what is the average rating of the brand Epla under the beauty category? So first, analyze the questions. What fields are we likely gonna need to use in order to answer the question? Well, first, we'll need the rating field, that's for sure. We'll also need the brand field and category field. So now, from those three fields, let's identify which we want as our value. From the looks of it, our rating field will be in the values area. And now, it just depends on us where we want to put the category and brand fields. We can structure our table in different ways, however we like. And this is the power of pivot tables. Now, as you can see here, our rating field became sum of rating. We don't want the total value of the ratings here. We want the average. To change that, click on this drop-down arrow right here. Go to Values Field Settings. And then Summarize Values field by average. Click on OK. As you can see, we can now see the average rating of each brand under each category. It seems that there are too many decimal points, so we'll decrease it by a bit. And now, we can see the answer to our question, which is 2.73. Our third question to answer is, how many available products are there from the brand Kenny under the electronics category? So as usual, first analyze the question. Looks like we'll need the fields product name, brand, category, and availability. So first, let's determine what field we'll put into the values area. Based from the question, it'll be the product name field. Now the rest of the fields, we can choose whether we want to put them into the columns or rows area. It depends on how you want the pivot table to look. So now that we've put the fields in their respective areas, we can now look for the answer to our question. And the answer to our question is 35 available products. And to answer my problem about how I can make this video reach more people, you can hit the like button down below, comment what you have learned so far, and might as well subscribe. How can we make charts from pivot tables? Now, one of the most powerful things you can use pivot tables for is data visualization. In simpler terms, we can make charts from pivot tables or pivot charts. So now, how do we do that? Well, it's relatively simple. We just select a pivot table, go to Pivot Table Analyze under Pivot Table Tools, and click on Pivot Chart. Here, we'll be presented by a menu. Now we have a lot of options to pick from on how we want to visualize our data. I want to use the column chart, so I'll select this chart right here, and then click on OK. As you can see, our column chart is looking a bit too complicated. This is because our pivot table itself has lots of data in it. In order to make it look simpler, we can simply reduce the amount of fields we're currently using. Keep in mind, how your overall chart looks like also depends on what fields are in the columns and rows area. We can also use a feature called sliders to make the pivot table more interactive as well, but that's an idea for a future video. You can also change the design of your charts under the Design tab. Whatever floats your boat. And you can also take your charts design up another level by watching these two videos right here. Once again, this was Minimalism Excel, and I hope to see you next time.